thank you guys for tuning in. This is season 3, episode 26 of the Peace Podcast. Just help me break free from diet culture, whatever that looks like. And so we're going to be talking with a special guest that I have today, which I'm super excited about. Elizabeth is here to talk to us about all things diet culture and all things she experiences in her expertise. So I'm going to let her tell you where you can find her, and then also introduce herself, and then we'll jump right in.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm looking forward to this conversation. I am Elizabeth. I am a women's health, nutrition, and food freedom expert coach, where I help women basically navigate, a healthier relationship with food and their bodies and create sustainable habits that fit their lifestyle. So that's really who I am and why I'm here. And you can find me everywhere at A Woman of Wellness.
Awesome. And so I love this topic. I have recorded on something similar before, but this topic intrigues me because I think that it is something that plagues especially women from literally the time we're like 6 or 7 years old. And I find that the messaging that we're given is just so toxic, and it's hard to, break free from that constant chatter that's in the back of your head because of it. So when you think about your own journey, like first of all, how did your diet culture thoughts begin, and how did you kind of break free from that in your own story?
Yeah, so interestingly enough, my biggest diet culture thoughts began the more I was learning about nutrition. So I was going to school for exercise and sports science. I was learning about nutrition, and I started learning like, okay, these are the good foods, these are the bad foods, right? We're taught all of these things. And so I learned, oh, I'm not supposed to be eating this, I'm supposed to be eating more of this. And it's interesting because having that simple conversation kind of triggered me a little bit. And I would see that I was with a lot of dietitians, and I would see what they were eating. And that was food I didn't eat as a kid. I didn't know, healthy foods. We had canned beans, canned peas, and canned corn as our vegetables for as a child. And so, I learned, I started kind of learning, oh, these foods are better or worse. And I started to kind of build up that, oh, well, I can't eat this. I shouldn't eat that. I need to be better about this. And it's interesting because that's kind of what triggered me. And that's a lot of times what triggers a lot of people, because we get started on some form of a diet that someone has said is good for us, or this will give us this particular result.
Mhm.
And we start to create those rules for ourselves. I can't eat this, I can't eat that. So that's really where it started for me. And I would probably guess that that's where it started for a lot of people, when you start to really get into like, what am I supposed to be doing? Because there's this space of, I need to get out of my body, right? I need to like lose the weight, I need to change. So then we find the program that tells us what to do.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I think too that when we hear the word diet, it doesn't really equate to like what you eat, it's what you're restricting. Because essentially your diet is what you're consuming, right? But because we've heard it so many times as a word that means restriction, the word diet itself can be triggering, even though it really is what we eat. So when you think about, our culture as it is right now, what do you see in your practice and your expertise is the biggest problem with the diet culture that we're in currently?
It's one word: comparison. We find ourselves in three different areas of comparison. We compare ourselves to others. We compare ourselves to an ideal or what it's supposed to be. And one that people might not think of, we compare ourselves to our past selves, or
Mm.
someone we used to be, right? My 20-year-old body or whatever, my teenage body. And that's really where it starts, is the comparison. Because we have decided, and we've let society or I call it outside noise, tell us that because we're different in some way, different than her, different than the ideal, that equals wrong. That equals bad. And that's where it really all
Mhm.
starts.
Yeah, and I think that we don't realize how much social media puts us into that space. And we're seeing these curated images, these curated representations of people. And we're like, well, if that's the way she looks like in a swimsuit and she's had kids and or she's the same age as me, then what is wrong with me that I don't look that way or I can't contort my body to look that way by doing exactly the same thing that she's doing. So how do we break free from that? Like that is such a huge it's one word, but it's such a huge deal. So how do we stop comparing ourselves to those three spaces?
Yeah. One thing I love for women to start with is I say curate your noise. So start to curate the input that you're getting. If you are following any account or you're coming across anything that makes you feel less than in your body, it's not for you. And I think sometimes we just get so mindless in the scroll that we don't always think about it until we realize how bad we feel after. And I want to encourage you to be very proactive about it. And if you go, oh, you know what? I can't compare myself to that, or that doesn't make me feel good. It needs to be turned off immediately in whatever capacity, an unfollow or a move on or whatever. That's the place that I would start. Then from there, we have to go inward because we have so much noise, like I
Mm,
said, coming in from the outside. We need to go inward and we need to start building that relationship with our own body, not what other people are saying we should believe or do or be or anything, but really create that relationship with ourselves and say, okay, this is the body I have, right? Like we're here together. This is the body that I get to have. How can we now build a thriving relationship together without all the noise that is, I guess, a distraction from what I really want to feel and do.
mm. That is so good. I have never heard anybody put it that way, but it is so good because you're right. It is the distraction. It's the distraction from the actual experience of being able to appreciate your body, appreciate what your body can do over what it looks like, and to be able to sit in that space and be content there. But we distract ourselves with our scrolls and with our internal dialogue that says, no, this is what's perfect and you just aren't enough. So
Yeah.
that's really good. That's going to sit with me for a while now because that's so good. And it's really hard to do, right? Because like I was saying in the beginning, we were given this representation of the supposed to. So you're supposed to look like this. If you work out, this is what you're supposed to look like. If you eat right, this is what you're supposed to look like. If you're taking care of yourself, this is what you're supposed to look like. And quite frankly, you and I could eat the exact same food and do the exact same workout and look completely different because our bodies were designed very differently. And I think we lose sight of that uniqueness and that individuality because we think that this fad diet is going to work for everybody. This new injection pill or whatever is going to work for everybody. And when it works for me, then I'm actually going to be able to love me and have a good relationship with food. But what I've found is a lot of the research, even on the Ozempics and the trizepatides, is saying that when you stop using the medication, that if you haven't repaired your relationship with food, that your body and your brain just go right back to the way that they were before you ever started. So, what does it look like from your viewpoint to really repair that relationship with food and just that mental noise around food?
Yeah, well, we kind of talked about the first step really is committing to a good relationship with your body, because I've had women come to me dozens and dozens of times saying, I lost the weight on the diet and I didn't feel any better in my body. Like I still didn't like my body. And they
Mm,
were confused because there was this expectation that everything was going to be better. And maybe they had hit their goal weight and they still were like, gosh, I almost feel the same, which is, it's hard to understand if you haven't been there, but
mhm,
it happens. And so that's the first step, is really committing to, hey, we're going to work on this together. Okay. And then from there, I, I want to invite everyone to take, we're going to kind of flip the script, if I could call it that, a mindset shift. For so long, if you have been in diet culture, your approach has been all about kind of punishment for your body, right? So you when you start a diet or when you start restricting, it's based on you wanting to escape your body. So we
mm,
are like, I want to get out of my body. I don't like this body. I want to escape it. And it's very shame based. It's very punishment based. I've got to restrict all these things. And I like to give a little analogy, when you have a little kid playing in a room and they have a dozen toys and they're playing with all these toys, and you walk in and you pick one toy up and you announce you're going to take that toy away. What toy do they instantly want? They want the toy in your
obviously.
hand, right?
Yes.
And so it's the same thing with food. We want what we take away. And so it's all, when we're in the diet cycle and we're in that world, our approach is always about punishment and shame. And I want to help flip that script and change the mindset to, what if I could change my body through nurturing and nourishment?
Mm,
If I were to say, hey, what does my body actually need? Because diet takes us away from intuitiveness. It takes us away from listening to our hunger and fullness cues, and it just tells us to eat what the diet says. But when we can start to say, you know what? My body is actually worthy of nourishment as it is right now. And as it changes, you're going to get there faster, not only get there faster, but also stay there longer. And you can create change from, like, you can still lose weight and love your body and create
mm,
change all at the same time, right? Acceptance doesn't necessarily mean my body's here and I have to learn to love it here. No, I can accept by doing things, by nurturing and nourishing this body, by asking my body what it needs. And naturally, I'm going to stop craving things because I'm giving my body more nutrition, what it needs, right? Naturally, I'm going to start overeating because I'm listening to my hunger and fullness cues. And it's just this ripple effect. And that is a very different approach from the shame, I can't eat this, or if I do, I'm going to lose control, spiral out of control, right? And keep going.
mm. Yeah, so it sounds like it's this healthy balance. And we hear this buzzword of mindful eating often. And I think that people kind of shy away from it because they don't trust themselves to eat mindfully. So, what does that shift look like? Because you did say it's a mindset shift, but what does that shift look like when we've grown up thinking there's good foods and there's bad foods, and I have to restrict in order to be healthy or nourish my body correctly or eat more of the good foods? How do you mindfully eat when that's what you've always known?
Yeah, and I want to acknowledge anyone that's here because that's normal. It's normal. If you have spent most of your life listening to the diets or following the diets and kind of ignoring those hunger cues that we were all born with. I mean, I have a toddler and she'll tell me when she's hungry and she'll stop when she's full, even if her plate's half full. Um, and so we have that in us, but we kind of have unlearned it throughout the years. And so, first of all, just acknowledge that that's okay. Because what happens here is that I like to think of it as a pendulum balance. Okay. So If you've been in the diet culture world for a long time, you have a lot of evidence on one side. So that balance is really tipped, right? That scale is really tipped to, well, I only know how to lose weight if I count my macros, or I only know how to lose weight if I'm restricting this. And it's because you have a lot of evidence that that's the way it worked. And as soon as the diet ended, you had the free for all, and you built evidence that you can't control yourself. So give yourself some grace, first of all, because it's okay. We need to start building evidence on the other side. We need to start tipping that scale. So it's not going to come overnight. It's a practice, just like dieting is a practice. Okay, it's a skill we learn. It's a practice. We need to learn the skill of mindfulness and mindful eating, and the skill is learning to slow down, learning to get in tune. And so, if someone's saying, well, where do I start? I would say pick one meal per day where you can sit down for, I don't even know, 10 minutes. I'm not going to set a time requirement for you or anything like that, but sit down and just check in. We eat so mindlessly. I don't think we realize how mindlessly we eat, but we do as a society. And so if you were just to check in and say, how am I feeling? Like, how am I feeling? What do I want? And stop when you're 80% full. I like to say you could have a few more bites and you'd be over full, right? But I'm satisfied. I feel good. I'm going to stop there. That will make a world of difference for you in learning how to listen to your body, because what's going to start happening as you do this is you're going to start recognizing, oh, I'm hungry. I should eat, rather than the diet says I can't, or I already got my macros today, right? You can then say, okay, I'm going to eat, and I'm going to eat until I'm full. I'm going to pay attention to that. And it sounds so simple, but don't discount the simplicity, because it produces a lot of evidence. It's going to tip that scale on the other side.
Yeah, that is so important to remember is I love how you said we have to build up the evidence, because I think that happens with a lot of areas where we're learning how to trust ourselves, because we've always learned to trust either the people around us or the research around us or the people we're comparing ourselves to, or like you were saying, the past version of me that made it happen with this thing. And so I know I can trust that to get my body to where it was. And then eventually your body changes, and the things that you did when you were in your teens and in your 20s no longer produce those same results. So now you start to have this whole distrust for the process, what you've always known, the foods that you could rely on, etc. And so I love the idea of saying, you don't have to clean your plate like you did when you were 9. Like you don't have to do that anymore. You don't have to only eat the foods that are on this resource list that you pulled off the internet, but you can listen to yourself. You can trust yourself to say, I'm hungry now, I'm full now, and building that evidence to really trust yourself with food the way that we have to with any other thing. Because I think that we have for so long abandoned ourselves, and we've learned to like trust all of these other things, that it even happens with food. And I think the other piece of this that I know listeners are going to wonder about is, well, what if I'm an emotional eater? Because I feel like that's a big part of why we go directly to the sweets or we directly overconsume, because we're eating based on emotions. So what would you tell those friends who are listening?
Yes, that's a good one. It's a few part answer here. The first one is, we do need to make sure that we're meeting our body's physical needs. And that's kind of where that mindful eating starts, because we can't really trust our body if we're giving it only cookies and expecting to listen to hunger and fullness cues. And so a lot of times, emotional eating can be misidentified as actual physical hunger. So I always say, let's really hone in on, like, are you balancing your meals with some proteins and carbohydrates and fats, right? Are we getting some balance? And we don't need to go into the depth of that, but especially if you've been a dieter, you know those probably pretty well. But that's the first thing that can be misidentified. So I always say, if you're going toward emotional eating, ask yourself, am I biologically hungry? Like, am I physically hungry? That might solve your problem from the very start. From there, there are a lot of emotions that we deal with in life. And I actually have a very different view of emotional eating than most people because I think it's a gift. Emotional eating
Mm.
is an opportunity for us to tap into something that our body is telling us. Okay. Something's off. And when we emotionally eat, we don't necessarily emotionally eat in response to the emotion. We eat to feel something. We're turning to the food to try to feel something. So if you're really stressed and overwhelmed, food becomes the vehicle to feeling relaxed, calm, right? So it again, it sounds a little simple, but I think it's very smart for people to reverse engineer this. We identify the emotion, which can be a little bit tricky at first, right? It takes some awareness, and that's where that mindfulness comes in. But it takes some awareness to say, hey, I'm recognizing an emotion I'm feeling. And it could be a chronic emotion. I'm chronically overtired. I'm chronically stressed. It could just be like I'm having a really sad day or a down day. But first, recognizing it, hey, I feel this emotion, overwhelm. Well, what do I want to feel? Typically, it's the opposite. I want to feel calm. I want to feel peace. If we have 5 seconds to switch to think about it and not just grab food, we can say, well, what could I do to feel peace that isn't food? Right? I could take a walk. I could read a book. I could call a friend. I could just sit for 10 minutes and just be, right? And all of a sudden, you have built another piece of evidence that, you know what, maybe before your identity was, I'm an emotional eater. And now you're building some evidence to say, I know what to do with my emotions. We can't control them coming in or not. We're going to experience emotions all the time. But we can control what we do with them, and that builds that additional piece of evidence like, oh, I can shift my actions to give me a better result.
Love that. So it's really about allowing and less about, shaming yourself or, going toward the thing that feels like comfort, but allowing the emotion to happen, but allowing it in a way where you're aligning the activity with what you actually want to be feeling, as opposed to doing the emotional eating thing and now you've layered more stress on yourself and more shame on yourself and more guilt on yourself. So that's really great advice. I love that. And I also know that there are going to be people, those are the people who think that change is always stressful. So this type of intuitive and mindful and just a shift of thinking in general will scare some people because it's change. So how do we convert to this different style of thinking, this different style of nurturing ourselves without making it stressful?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think I've learned over the years that the only constant of life is change, right? Like, especially as a mother, I've learned that like there is no such thing as just never changing. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think
Mm-hmm.
I think that's where the peace comes from, right? Is understanding that peace exists in trying new things and creating change for yourself. And the message that we have received for most of our lives is that change has to look hard, right? It has to look like overhauling your lifestyle. That's what diets are. I mean, if you think about like 75 hard, I mean, that one's insane. Or whole 30, or like you have this like dramatic change in your life, and that's the message we've been sold. But
Mm-hmm.
instead, could we approach it more gentle and say, I recognize I want to make these big changes, and I like to remind When I coach my clients, I say, meet yourself where you are. Okay. Not 10 steps ahead of where you are, not where she is. Meet yourself where you are. If you want to be an exerciser and you want to have activity in your life, but you don't get any activity right now, don't jump to 5 days a week. Start with a couple, or start with a 10-minute walk after lunch. Um, Meet yourself where you are, and then you can get there faster. But I think the anyone that's struggling with this is that their mindset might be in the place of, I've got to change a lot of things fast, and I understand it. It makes sense, because it's like, oh, if I change all these things, I'll change fast. But we know how that works, right? We change fast and then we lose the willpower. Willpower only
Mhm.
gets us so far. And then we have to rely on different systems to keep us going. And so the truth is the slower you move, the faster you go, and the longer the change lasts. And it is true. We just have to start, again, going back to my visual of the pendulum, or the scale. We just have to start building a little bit more evidence, like, oh, look, I did this way and it's starting to work.
Mm. It's one of those things where it's like the gradually yet suddenly. Like you're doing this thing gradually over time and then suddenly it changes. It's kind of like when we're thinking about any other thing in life. It's like that gradually, then suddenly. So like you don't see somebody over the course of a year, and for them, like their bodies haven't changed or this thing that they're working on hasn't changed. But then someone who hasn't seen them in the year sees them and goes, oh my gosh, you look so different, and because it's a gradual thing on their side, it seems so suddenly on the other side. But I think that's how the most the changes that actually sustain are the ones that are gradually and then suddenly, because you're doing that incremental shift as opposed to trying to do a complete overhaul. It's like when people say, oh, well, if you want to work on your mindset, then journal and do breath work and meditate and do yoga. And then people try to do all of those on the same day, every day of the week. And then they wonder why they can't stick with it. And I think that that becomes a part of diet culture in general, because they'll say, count your macros. And then people are like obsessed with counting their macros. And then a month later, they're like, well, that didn't work for me. It's because it's not sustainable for you to do this sudden, complete overhaul of what you're doing. But if you gradually, like you said, the one meal a day, or, knowing where you are and then working on that next thing, just like with anything else, once walking becomes a habit that you do every evening or 3 times a week, then you can add on, something else that you might enjoy doing, like yoga before bed or yoga when you wake up in the morning. So I love that, because I think that people picture any type of wellness as a shift, and any type of change as stress, and any type of thing that adds stress as something that they're going to avoid. But I'm also
Yeah.
knowing and wondering, there is, the gradual part of how we intuitively eat, and eat with a different mindset. And then there's how we move our bodies and how we do that with a different kind of mindset. But I think something that we talked about earlier that we probably need to extend on a little bit is that part about learning how to love and accept our own bodies for what our bodies are and what they do. And so, how do you get there? Because the other stuff is kind of like a doing, and this is very internally coming to terms with something and thinking differently.
Yeah. A being is the precursor to a doing,
Yeah.
right? I mean, you mentioned that as doing. Well, we need to be that person.
Hmm.
And I like to think of it, I like to compare it to kind of a romantic relationship, or a relationship with a significant other. That person isn't perfect. That relationship isn't perfect. You're not perfect. But there are certain ways, certain ways of being that help kind of make that relationship thrive, right? If you were to ignore that person or be mean to them or say unkind words, that relationship would struggle big time. And no amount of let's do this is going to change that, because the way that you're being with them is not helpful. It's not building. But, if you want the relationship to thrive, you need to be a listener. You need to be someone who spends time with them and who loves them and who, asks questions and is willing to commit to an imperfect relationship. No relationship is perfect, and we can all agree on that. But imperfect relationships can thrive, and they take they take time, they take communication, they take commitment. And that's exactly what it is to essentially become, what in my practice I say, a woman of wellness, right? Become that woman of wellness. Well, it takes those things. We've got to be patient with ourselves. We have to communicate with ourselves. We have to start creating that relationship that we want to thrive. Hey, man, I don't love this about you today. Or, like having those conversations with each other, or let's be patient. You've been through a lot. I was just thinking of a story. If you don't mind me
Yeah,
sharing like a
sure.
little personal example, when we were talking about emotional eating, I thought I'd share this because everyone goes, well, you're a coach, you're immune, right? Or you know exactly what to do. But here's the truth. No one is immune. I don't care if you're the expert, the most highest expert in the world. I went through a few weeks of emotional eating. I did, okay? And I was struggling. Like I was kind of overeating, and I was just like, I just was like, gosh, I should have this figured out. I know what to do, right? And I sat down for a minute and I thought, what is going on in my life? And the truth is I'm navigating three kids. One of them is a toddler. We decided to homeschool this next year. I have a business that I run, and I realized I was trying to do so many things, and I was in my head all day long. Like there was just so much going on, and I was overwhelmed. And I identified all of these emotions, and I realized, like, okay, I have I naturally have kind of been turning to food because it's the easiest, right? I mean, a good relationship with food is not a perfect relationship with
Mm,
food. And so the cool thing is in that moment I was like, okay, this is an opportunity. This is a gift. My body is saying you're a mess. Like you have some things that need to be worked on. And as soon as I identified that and started to say, okay, I do need to address these chronic emotions, it went away, right? It erased all of those, the emotional eating, because I was meeting the needs of my own body. And that's the beauty of it. Okay, it's not going to be perfect, but it's cool because we're all going to go through seasons of ups and downs. And when we are committed to that relationship, then we can always go back and say, hey, what's going on here? Let's work through this and we can come out better.
mm. I love that. So it's the focus isn't on just the food, just the exercise, just the wellness is so much more than the diet and the physical activity. It's really being able to attune to yourself. And that's in all of those areas. What does your body need? How does it need to be nurtured? What does it need to be eating right now? What do we need to be doing right now? What is the workout that's going to give us, the most internal benefit? And so I just love the idea of, instead of doing all of these things that the resources say that you're supposed to use in this kind of like checklist way, it's back to what you were saying earlier, which is it's about nurturing, not punishing. It's about allowing and not restricting, and just really getting in attunement with yourself. And so we're
Yeah.
nearing the end. So I want to ask my final question, which is the question that I ask every guest who comes on the pod. But it's, if you had a magic wand and you could use it on this topic in particular that we just talked about, to change something, fix something, modify something, what would you use it to do as it relates to diet culture, and why?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think I would help everyone, I guess I would like help everyone believe that their body is inherently good and
Mm,
they are capable of knowing and meeting the needs of their own body.
mm.
And I think, gosh, I've seen it in my clients time and time again, but as soon as we have that relationship, nothing else matters. The stress of all of that other noise, it goes away because we're in it with ourselves, right? We're in it for ourselves and to better ourselves, which then helps us better the world. And I believe that when people feel good about who they are and confident in who they are, they can show up better for their life that they want to live.
I love that so much. What a mic drop moment at the end here. So Elizabeth, I just want to thank you so much. You guys don't know what we went through behind the scenes to make this happen, and so I'm so glad we did because I feel like in these, 30, 40 minutes or so, the wealth of knowledge that you've dropped is immense. And also, I always think about when people come to the show, if my younger self would have heard this advice, how could it have saved me, helped me, grown me, shaped me? And I know that the eating disorder Karey from way back in teenage and 20 years would have just loved to hear the things that you said today. So I just appreciate you so much. And I hope that my listeners can take away something as well. If this message resonated with you, please share it with the people that you know and reach out to Elizabeth. She's told you where you can find her. She's a wealth of knowledge, more so than we could put on this show. And definitely reach out to her directly so that you can get some of those internal shifts happening in your life with the help of her as your coach. So, Elizabeth, we appreciate you and thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.